Hello, this is Angela with Permaculture. Welcome back to Housefire Friday. This is a segment where I talk about issues of the home, the domestic sphere, the skills that we utilize in order to take care of our home, and the philosophy behind homemaking, including things like caring for children and balancing our budget and living within our means. And the ways that we want to do that through the lens of caring for the earth and caring for people and sharing out of the abundance that we have. So today I'm in the upstairs of my home. I am kind of hiding up here because my kids are working on projects downstairs and it's a little bit loud downstairs and it's super hot out and all the air conditioners are running. So this seems like an optimal place to hide. It's a little messy up here. We have kind of piles of things around the house that are items that we took home from my parents' home, and I still haven't found a place for them, or I need to, clean and sort and get rid of other things in order to make a home for things we've brought in. And so it's a little bit cluttered and disorganized in our home right now. And let me show you. This is sitting here on the floor staring at me. This is a painting that my grandfather received in lieu of payment for medical services that he rendered. My grandfather was a small town country doctor in rural Indiana. A lot of his patients couldn't always afford to pay him in cash. And so he sometimes got paid in things like literally pies and chickens. And also this painting, which growing up was in the hallway, no matter which house we lived in, was in the hallway between my bedroom and the bathroom, and it scared me to death. I was afraid to go use the bathroom in the middle of the night because this creepy flippin' clown was staring at me. However, my 18-year-old bee is obsessed with clowns. She loves to paint clowns, collect clowns. She has a bunch of clown drawings and paintings on her wall, and so she really wanted this. So I said she could have it. Otherwise, it would have gone to the thrift store. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. I got a request on my video the other day where Ruth and Bee and I talked about unschooling. I got a comment in the comment section to ask if I would discuss a little bit more about what I mean when I use the phrase voluntary poverty in reference to our family. And I do feel that deserves some explanation. So I'm going to be knitting while we talk. By the way, I'm working on a vest for myself. So if you hear some clicking, clacking of needles, it's because I'm knitting while we're talking. So what do I mean when I say voluntary poverty? I use that phrase not infrequently on this channel. A lot of what I talk about in this space, especially on Housefire Friday, has to do with budgeting, has to do with living within our means and strategies that our family has utilized in order to avoid going into debt. And I think it's important to have some context when I talk about that. So for the first 15 years of our marriage, my husband and I lived the first couple of years below the federal poverty line. And after that, we qualified for food stamps up until about 5 years ago or so. Now, granted, we are a large family. There's 6 of us, and we are all on basically one salary, which is my husband's salary as a teacher. It's a little bit more complicated than that because for a number of years, my husband, who is a member of the Chickasaw Nation, was committed to only working in tribal schools. And so he worked for the Siletz Confederated Tribes School, and then he worked for the Native American Youth and Family Association School here in Portland. Those both paid significantly less than other teaching jobs in Oregon. And so he was really passionate about educating and creating opportunities for Indigenous students. And so he was willing to forego part of his salary, and that came at a really high cost to our family. So when I talk about the fact that our family lived on a really, really limited budget and that having budgeting skills was really crucial to us avoiding credit card debt or any kind of unsecured debt of any kind, the only loans we've ever had to take out are our mortgage and student loans. And, we've managed to pay off all of the medical debt that we have, and I'll get into that more in a little bit. We lived on just a shoestring budget. And by that, I mean all of our clothes were thrifted. We spent, initially like $25 a week on groceries. There was a period of time where our family did take WIC. My husband was in graduate school, and I was working very, very part-time while having multiple very small children. And if you are a pregnant person or a parent with very young children, please utilize the resource of WIC if you live in the United States. It is a government agricultural subsidy that really makes a significant difference in the nutrition of the majority of children in the United States. So absolutely something that our tax dollars pay for, and something that really has shown to make a significant difference in the lives of families that are struggling in America. The only other kind of assistance we've ever taken is when my husband would switch jobs. So you would end up in this situation with teachers where your health insurance starts on October 1st and ends on, if you leave the job, on the last day of August. And if you continue at the same job, you would have paid in for another month and you would end up with healthcare in the month of September. But when you change jobs in teaching, you often end up with this month gap where one of your insurance from your first employer runs out at the end of August, and you have not yet paid into the pool because you've just started your new job and you have to pay in for a month. And so you don't get health insurance again until October. So there were multiple job changes where we were able to get the whole family on Medicaid for a month to cover that gap in case there was a healthcare emergency. And I encourage any of you, if you qualify for that, you should totally take advantage. And I don't want to make it sound in any way like I am diminishing folks who need to use social safety nets. I would hope that everybody who watches this channel is very well aware of the fact that in the United States, the reason that most families end up needing government assistance, end up needing SNAP or TANF or WIC or other programs, is essentially a way of subsidizing their employer not paying a living wage. So the majority of those families are drawing an income that is not a living wage and cannot support their family, while CEOs are making astronomical millions and millions of dollars a year, sometimes many, like hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet choosing to pay their employees such a wage that they are unable to meet their needs without government assistance. So you may have some animosity toward people who use government assistance. I have zero. I'm happy to pay my tax dollars for that. I'm frustrated that I need to pay my tax dollars for that, when what should be happening is employers should be paying a living wage, reducing the pay for their executives, and realizing that if you're going to compensate somebody fairly for their work, they should be able to feed their family and cover their bills and have good health insurance. And we don't do that. So when you see somebody who's accepting government assistance, realize that the fault lies not with them. It lies with the person that they work for, the corporation that they work for, and the fact that they know they count on their employees having government assistance. I'll actually link to some information down below about that, particularly about how Walmart does that. Okay. So that's just a little bit of background. I have no problem talking about money or being really transparent about what I make or my husband makes or what our financial situation is. I was raised in a household where you didn't talk about money. But I feel that it's really important both for my kids' financial literacy and because I think we all should be more transparent about what we are being compensated, how we are being compensated, and how we are making ends meet. And, I don't think there's any shame in talking about money. And that leads me to this concept of voluntary poverty. So while we were living on an incredibly tight budget for many, many years, and it was very stressful, it was hard to forego things and tell my kids, like, actually, grandma and grandpa and your auntie and uncle have invited us out to go eat out with them and then go to the movies with them and do all of these events with them that cost a bunch of money. Like, we don't have money in the budget. That's just not something that we can afford without going into debt, and we're not going to go into debt. So there were many things that we had to forego, and it was really challenging for a long time. But it felt really good to live within our means and to uphold our values. My husband was doing work that he felt was really fulfilling, but again, it was a voluntary poverty. And I want to explain and answer the question that was left for me, what I mean by that. I am a college educated woman. My husband is college educated with multiple master's degrees. I am from a middle class family. My dad was a doctor in the Air Force. My mother was a stay-at-home parent and, worked intermittently to help do things like pay for college for myself and my siblings. So I graduated from college with no debt, with no student loans, thanks to my parents. And again, I'm I'm an educated person with the perfect, like absolutely have an ability to work. When we were first married, I worked multiple jobs until I had Ruth, and then I always worked at least 10 to 15 hours a week at whatever job I could get. I did breastfeeding counseling, I did childcare, I taught classes, I taught biology and chemistry classes, and I've done tutoring in biology and chemistry, all of that stuff for a long time just to help make ends meet. And again, my husband, incredibly well educated. We have a lot of privilege. My parents were married, stable, homeowners, didn't struggle with drug addiction, didn't struggle with mental health problems, didn't struggle with debt. My husband's parents, married, homeowners, stable, both had long-term employment with one employer, pensions, very stable childhood upbringing. So that is a tremendous amount of privilege that we both came from. And I experienced for first 15 years of my marriage, a much lower standard of living than I had grown up with. And I chose that. That was voluntary. I could have stepped out of that at any point in time if I had had fewer children, if I had chosen to put my kids in childcare, if I had chosen to put my kids in public school. And for us, the reason I say voluntary poverty is because we technically were living a standard, so we technically were at an income level where we qualified for all kinds of assistance, but that was because I chose to do the unpaid job of being a homemaker and a homeschool parent, unschooled parent. And that's what I mean by voluntary. We had the opportunity to raise our standard of living and increase our income substantially at any point in time if I had chosen to change the way that we were living. I was readily employable. I am readily employable with a broad range of skills and expertise. So I don't want anybody on this channel to think that when I talk about how we really struggled for a long time, that was a position that we couldn't climb out of if we made changes to our living situation, because we could. We also were choosing to live in a very expensive part of the world to be by my husband's family, Portland, Oregon, very expensive. I mentioned in a video I talked about a while back, we have a land trust house that made it much more possible for us to afford to live here. We really contemplated moving back to St. Louis, where housing is incredibly, the housing situation is incredibly different. Housing is much more affordable and much more accessible, and there's a lot more of it available for rent or purchase at a much more reasonable price, especially 15 years ago. So when I talk about voluntary poverty, I don't mean to be glib, and that is in no way diminishing the experience of other folks in a situation where they are really struggling financially. And I don't want to diminish what other folks are going through. And I want to make it really clear that I have had and continue to have all kinds of privilege and opportunities. And that when we were experiencing life the way we experienced it for 15 years, that was not entirely because of circumstances outside of our control. It was something that we did to live in alignment with our values. I will also say it was very difficult, and there were two main reasons it was not sustainable, and I want to talk about those for a minute. So the two main reasons our lifestyle was not sustainable, and by that I mean a teacher's salary of initially $30-something thousand for a family of at the time for us. The two main reasons that the lifestyle that we lived was not going to be sustainable long-term were medical and dental costs and student loans. So let me talk about this for a second. So our second kid, B, had a congenital enamel malformation on her teeth, and so did our fourth kid, George. Our other two kids had perfectly beautiful teeth, no cavities, amazing teeth. B had several teeth that came in that didn't even have any enamel on them at all when they erupted out of her gums. George was the same. And of course, we went to the dentist as soon as we saw what her teeth were like. I knew B's teeth were abnormal because the dentin was exposed when the teeth came in. And obviously she had an older sister, 22 months older, and I knew what healthy baby teeth should look like. So we brought her into the dentist and we were told like, oh, this is because you breastfed her, which is a whole subject. Don't get me started. No, it's not because I breastfed her. It's called congenital enamel hypoplasia. You could Google it. So the dentists in America are notoriously anti-breastfeeding and conflate pediatric dental issues with breastfeeding parents all the time. I asked what I should be doing for my, at the time, 5-month-old, and I was told by the dentist that I should be giving her cow's milk in a sippy cup instead of breastfeeding, which is all kinds of neglectful, and cow's milk is insufficient nutrition, and that's just terrible, terrible, terrible advice. So we found a new pediatric dentist. She ended up needing many, many rounds of dental work under general anesthesia because of her age. And let me just tell you, dental insurance at the time covered $1,250 per year of dental work. Now I think it's like $1,500. And she ended up needing more than $10,000 worth of dental work, like right off the bat. As the next few years went on, because she needed dental work done under general anesthesia in the hospital because she was under 2, our medical insurance didn't want to cover the OR charges or the anesthesiologist because it was dental work. And the dental insurance obviously didn't cover it. And it was a lot of negotiation. And we were basically nearly bankrupted by the dental bills from one of my kids. Because we fell in this gap in America where healthcare is a nightmare, and lots of Americans have to declare bankruptcy because of medical and dental bills. And we were looking at where our budget was every month, and we were seeing that we were paying more out in bills that we had than income that was coming in. And that's when we reached a point where we considered moving back to Missouri. And I will say I have the tremendous privilege of my sister, who is also a doctor like my dad, helped pay a number of the anesthesia bills that we had. And that made all the difference to us. We have the privilege of having family that has stable income and is able to help out when we needed it. The second thing is student loans. For a number of reasons I won't get into here, my husband should not have had any student loans for college. But due to the fact that he didn't exactly know all the ins and outs when he was 18 and applying for college, and didn't really know what he qualified for. And I think his parents didn't either. I don't even know how much help they were to him. He ended up with a significant amount of student loans, despite doing work study in order to go to college. And so for our family, that was a very large payment, bigger than a car payment every month for 10 years. So when we were looking at our debt to income ratio, we were renting at the time. Rents were going up and up and up in Portland. We were renting a 700 square foot apartment. We had 3 children, 2 bedrooms. And by bedrooms, I mean the second bedroom was like a closet. You could get a toddler sized bed in there. And we were not being able to afford rent, paying off the bills that we had in terms of medical and dental bills, and pay off student loans. Had we not had student loans, had we had universal health care, the income that we had at that time, when my husband was teaching for Native American Youth and Family High School, we could live very well on that and put away a little bit of money every month. It was because of those 2 factors that our lifestyle was not sustainable in the long term. And then over the years, my husband transitioned from teaching math and classics to becoming a special education teacher in math. And so that was a little bit of a pay bump. It required another round of graduate school. And I'm very grateful. The Chickasaw Nation actually ended up reimbursing us for a significant portion of that round of graduate school, which is just a huge blessing. And then I started this YouTube channel, which didn't make any money for a long time. And I don't actually like to think about what it makes in terms of dollars per hour. I don't think about that. But I want to say that the ad revenue that I get from you all not skipping ads and not using an ad blocker and watching my videos, and then the very generous support of my patrons through Patreon, and the support of folks who will throw a couple of bucks at my PayPal or my Venmo, that pays my mortgage every month and then some. It has made all of the difference between us walking this very fine knife's edge of any large expense will tip us from a sustainable living situation into a crisis, to where I have a buffer now that we can live a comfortable middle-class life. So I no longer consider us to be in a position of voluntary poverty. We are comfortably middle class. And by that, I mean, instead of one crisis away from being bankrupt or homeless, we are 2 crises away from being bankrupt or homeless. We have much better health insurance than we used to have. Our dental insurance is still terrible. Much better health insurance with, instead of having a $17,000 annual out-of-pocket maximum, we have, like $1,000. So huge difference in what that means to our security. So I hope that answered the question of what do I mean when I say voluntary poverty, and what does that look like for us? I also want to say something here at the end. If you are middle class in America, you are struggling and you're seeing your dollars don't go as far. If you open up TikTok or you open up Instagram or any social media platform, you will see this discourse where folks are exhausted and they're unable to pay their bills, or they are unable to save anything for retirement, or they can't even think about that kind of thing. And where they see a standard of living much lower than their parents had. And for me, I feel a little bit insulated from that, or have felt insulated from that, because I have voluntarily chosen to have a much lower standard of living than my parents. And I want to say, like, my parents didn't help out. I didn't ask them for money. I didn't ask them for loans. They would not have given it. My parents did things like, when they lived in Florida, they would pay for plane tickets for us to come visit once a year. So I'm not saying my parents weren't generous. They paid for things like George's futsal lessons when I couldn't afford it, and my mom really wanted him to have futsal lessons. But my parents very much believed, like, you have to make your own way, and this is our money that we earned, and we worked really hard for it, and you have to decide on what standard of living you want, and you have to make that happen for yourself. So I know there are families who are in situations where their parents believe very much in helping children with a down payment on a house, or buying them their first car, or paying off their student loans. Again, my parents did pay for my college. That was a huge, unbelievable gift, huge gift, to not have two batches of student loans that we had to pay off. We just had to pay off Casey's. Being middle class, and, if you are in America, middle class is not a position of comfort and security like it was for our parents. It's not a position of stability. It's a precarious place to be. And I think it's something that I've become a lot more interested in as I have seen our stability and our income reach a place where we live within a very tight budget still, but we are not struggling the way that we were. There are little small things that I no longer have to say no to, because we are not living where every penny has to be managed incredibly tightly. I don't have a great answer when we see the wealth disparity in America ever increasing, and those at the very top becoming obscenely rich. I saw a post today, I think it was by my friend Green Lady Permaculture, that was like, in the time it takes you to read this, Jeff Bezos will have made $10,000. And like, just a huge amount of disparity between the folks at the very top with hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, and those of us in the middle class. And basically, like, I personally feel that if you are lower class or middle class, anybody, if you are working a job for a wage, or you own your own business and you are working, you are working class. If you have a boss, you are working class. For me, I've really been thinking a lot more about the way politics in America and the way that messages are communicated to us is meant to divide folks who are really within a very narrow range of finances. And again, like, 1 crisis away or 2 crises away, versus those are super rich, right? Like, wanting to have that conflict between folks who live just within, thousands of dollars of each other in income, versus folks who are millions of dollars away from us in income. And how the infighting is something that those at the top want. If you have been following the disaster with Oprah attempting to ask working class people to pay for the recovery in Maui when she has $3.6 billion or something like that, and could pay for it out of pocket herself at very little inconvenience. Just the audacity of those at the top that want us to fund things while they sit on and hoard, like dragons on their pile of gold, massive quantities of money. And here we all are talking about, like, oh, what can I do to make it so that I can get to a place where if my washer breaks, it's not an absolute catastrophe, or where I can tell my kids, like, you can buy the name brand ice cream at the grocery store, or where I can tell my kids, like, actually, we can go to the movies as a family every once in a while. Like, the very small things that should make life enjoyable and comfortable, and we should be allowed to treat ourselves to and enjoy and experience, are things that we feel a tremendous amount of shame and anxiety over because we can't even afford those small things, or we have to be hyper vigilant about what of those things we can afford and how much riskier that makes our financial situation on the back end. So, not to make it a giant thing about a class war and how much I hate the rich and how I think billionaires should not be a thing, I do feel as time goes on, I'm more comfortable. Instead of saying, should billionaires be a thing, which is a video I made like over a year ago, billionaires should not be a thing. Okay, I'll leave it there. If you are struggling with your finances, I hope that my comment or my use of the phrase voluntary poverty is not offensive to you. I don't mean any offense, and I have mad empathy. I have been in a position where, for many years, where it's exhausting. I mean, it's still exhausting how I live now, but it's magnitudes of difference of exhausting to live in that state of hypervigilance around your budget, around your bills, around debt. And we aren't meant to live that way, and you shouldn't be living that way. You should be fairly compensated with a living wage from your employer. We should have those at the top pay their fair share. We live in the richest society. My viewers that are in America, we live in the wealthiest society in the world, and there is no reason that anyone in America should be hungry. There's no reason anybody in America should be at risk for their housing. There's no reason anybody in America should not be able to take vacations and have leisure time and enjoy their family and have their health care taken care of. There's no reason we should live that way. The reason that we live that way is because of the power structure of capitalism, right? And it's not how it's meant to be, and nobody should gaslight you into saying that, like, this is just the way modern life is. If you are struggling, if you're exhausted, if you can budget everything down to the last penny and still see your bills exceeding your income, still see things like medical debt, student loan debt, rent, utilities being astronomical and absolutely unequal to your income, and you see your amount of expenses increasing and outpacing the increase in your income, it shouldn't be that way, and nobody should be telling you that that's just how life is here. It needs to change, and I don't have the answers of how to change that. I recognize very much that what worked 20 years ago for us to live, below the poverty line and pay to put my husband through graduate school, that is not relevant. That's dated talk for the reality that we're living in now. And so when you hear my videos where I talk about budgeting and I talk about what we've done to make our lifestyle more sustainable, I recognize that the cost of living is ever increasing. And at some point, tightening the belt and pinching pennies is insufficient. It requires systemic change, especially when we see the system continuing to clamp down and make it more and more difficult for us to thrive, to prosper, to be sustainable in the first place. We need systemic change. And those small things that you're doing as an individual are a stopgap and are something that can maybe give you a little bit of wiggle room, but they're not the final solution. They're not the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is systemic change to raise the quality of life for everyone and to share in the riches and the bounty and the abundance and the high quality of life that we should all be experiencing in America. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope that was helpful. I would welcome your comments. I would welcome what you think we can do as a society, what you think should be done. That was a little heavy, but thank you for watching. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and I'll be back real soon.